Hello and welcome to Lady Dynamite Creates. I'm Tiffany and today's adventure takes us deep beneath the waves as we dive into some mermaid magic. That's right, we're crafting a doll for an epic collab, so grab your fins and let's make some waves. Before we dive into the depths of creativity, I would like to share with you the talented souls joining me for this collab. Our host, I Could Do That DIY, Blurred Colors Art, Dolly Pop, Electric Bunny, Fairyman Dolls, His Name is Akin, and Steffo Doll. Be sure to visit their channels to catch their unique takes on this underwater adventure. Now get ready to dive deep into the world of mermaids and magic as we bring our visions to life. I've chosen a broken G1 Draculaura doll as my base. Unfortunately, she's missing arms and legs, but I believe this will add a unique challenge and some charm to the transformation. To complete the base, I've selected a head from my stock box, although it does have a sizable rip in the scalp. I secure her hip joints into position by carefully gluing them. This will ensure stability for the tail while I create the armature. I could have cut them off, but I figure this just saves me epoxy. To create the tail, I'm going to craft an armature using wire and aluminum foil. This armature will serve as the foundation for layering on the epoxy. By shaping the wire and wrapping it with foil, I can create a sturdy structure that's going to allow me to play with different poses until I find the right one. It's important to get the proportions and curves just right at this stage because once you add that epoxy, it becomes an ordeal if you need to change it. This will be my first time to turn Draculaura into a mermaid, and I'm excited to see how it turns out. Now that the wire armature is shaped, it's time to add another layer of stability to the mermaid tail, and for this I'm going to mix up 2-part epoxy clay. I started flattening the clay and layering it on at first, but it wasn't going as smoothly as I wanted. To make this process easier, I started rolling out the clay to a uniform thickness. This helped me to use less clay and to have fewer lumpy areas. Before the clay can harden, I start smoothing it out with water to remove any bumps. The smoother I can get it, the less sanding I'll have to do later. It will be covered with scales, but creating a smooth surface will make adding those details go a lot easier. Incorporating techniques used by Thalasso Hobbier on their Guardian Shrine, I'm excited to add some fins to the mermaid tail that have a unique ethereal look. To achieve this, I'm using a silicone mold, in this case a pot trivet, that I'm repurposing for the sake of art. I prepare the mold by dusting it with shimmery mica powder, giving the fins a subtle luster. Next, I carefully place a straightened length of wire into one of the channels within the mold. This wire will provide structure and support for the fins. With the wire in place, I pour UV resin into the channel, ensuring that it fully covers the wire and fills the mold. While Thalasso Hobbier used hard type resin for their project, I've opted to use a custom blend of hard and soft types. This combination provides just the right balance of stiffness, allowing for the fins to remain posable while minimizing the risk of damage. Welcome to a spontaneous behind-the-scenes moment. Caught up in the midst of my creative process, I forgot to hit the stop button on the camera. But perhaps it was meant to be, as you now have the opportunity to join me in my art room for a glimpse into my tinkering with a mermaid fin placement for way too long. Now on to the fun part. It's time to attach those fabulous fins to our mermaid tail. But first, let's grab our trusty drill and get to work. I'm going to pepper the bottom of the tail with tons of tiny holes. Additionally, I made some modifications to the shape and length of the tail to accommodate the large number of individual fin pieces I plan to add. There's a lot of them. On to the scales. I've decided to create them using paper circles punched out of stiff cardstock, giving them a sturdy and durable feel. With 3 different sizes to work with, I'm all set to add some texture and depth to this mermaid tail. As I carefully glue on each scale, I make sure to mix up the sizes for extra visual interest. I want to create a dynamic pattern that truly brings this mermaid to life. With every scale placed, this mermaid's tail is starting to take shape, and I can't help but question my sanity in life choices. Hours have passed in what feels like the never-ending cycle of gluing, sticking, and repeating. But hey, all great works of art require a little bit of madness, right? As I sit here covered in glue and surrounded by a sea of paper circles, I can't help but marvel at my decision-making. So here's to embracing the madness. Knowing that paper alone won't suffice and wanting to ensure these scales stay in tip-top shape, I'm breaking out the big guns, UV resin. the undercover champion of doll artists everywhere, saving us from artistic accidents one project at a time. So the forearms I snagged for my parts bin belong to an operetta doll and aren't exactly a skin tone match for Draculaura. I whip out my trusty Vallejo model paint and mix up a blend with pink, yellow, light flesh, and white paints to create the shade that's the pure Draculaura perfection that we know and love. Armed with my airbrush, I dive into the paint job, ensuring every inch of those forearms gets a flawless custom coat, and while I'm at it, I give any sneaky bits of epoxy peeking out at her waist to spritz too. With paintbrush in hand, I'm ready to tackle our mermaid tail makeover. The first step is laying down that base coat, opting for a brush to navigate those tricky trailing trails along the transition at her waist. What a tongue twister! Once the base coat is all set, I dive into adding signature stripe marks to the tail. I'm taking inspiration from the intricate designs of silicone mermaid tails and incorporating their style of marking onto my doll's tail. This is a departure from my usual solid color or simple gradient patterns, so I was a bit nervous about the execution. I really love how it turned out though. There was a brief panic moment where I was like, oh no, what have I done? And had to wipe the paint and start over again. After completing the paint job on the scales, I sealed her with Mr. Super Clear and gave her body a little blush. Now here's the tricky part. I wanted to add shimmer to the tail for the full mermaid vibe, but if I slap on the sealant, it'll just dull that beautiful sparkle. So once I'm done contouring her body, I'll whip out my secret weapon, a layer of semi-gloss varnish with a hint of dragonfly glaze and mica powder. It's like giving her that perfect amount of shimmer and shine. Ah, the trials and tribulation of mermaid fashion. While our aquatic beauty may not need much in the way of clothing, YouTube guidelines dictate that we must cover the, essentials. So I began the task of 3D modeling the perfect top inspired by this kelp bra by Merbella. I started with a basic shape in 3D Max, but it was ZBrush that allowed me to give it that organic underwater feel. After printing a few, because I know myself too well, I embark on a painting spree, creating not one, not two, not three, but yes, 4 versions before achieving the mermaid-approved perfection. I've got a bit of a reputation for decking out my dolls with accessories, and let's face it, a mermaid without a trident, it just doesn't feel right. So armed with my trusty 3D modeling skills, I crafted the perfect trident design and brought it to life with 3D printing magic. Now here's where the adventure really begins. Despite my best efforts to create a slot for the handle onto the top before printing, it was one not-so-hilarious fail after another. I ended up resorting to drilling it out myself, proving once again that sometimes you just gotta roll with the punches. Originally, I toyed with the idea of a classic wooden handle, but I decided to give it that Midas touch and coat it in UV resin and paint that golden gleam. The trident I modeled has special cupped areas on the top and the bottom designed to house some mystical orbs, or in this case, beads I found at the craft store. Off camera, I couldn't resist adding a bit more flair to this trident masterpiece. And just like that, the trident went from ordinary to extraordinary, ready to cast its spell on anyone who dares venture into the magical realm of mermaids. Now on to the main event, painting the face. Check out this colorful lineup of supplies, my watercolor pencils, pastels, and shimmery mica powders that are ready to turn this doll into a masterpiece. The full list is waiting for you in the description box below, so don't miss it. Before the repainting fun begins, it's time to prep the canvas, or in this case, the doll. I whip out my trusty can of Mr. Super Clear and give the doll 3 coats, creating a perfect paper-like texture to draw on. Now, armed with my trusty pencil, I dive into sketching, playing with shapes and sizes until the doll's eyes are just right. I stick to a skin tone color for this initial sketch because, yep, mistakes happen and I'm all about easy fixes here. Once the shape's good, it's time to darken those lines and add some pizzazz. And let me tell you, I'm not one to have it all figured out from the get-go. I'm all about letting my mood guide the brush, embracing the creative chaos, and seeing where the project takes me. I'd like to take a moment to express my gratitude to all of my wonderful supporters on Patreon. Their generosity and support are what make these videos possible, and I'm incredibly grateful for each and every one of you. Angel Book Walter, Awkward Bird, B. Burnett, Deborah Sweeney, Jay Zur, Lurker Cat, Stephanie L., Josephine, Delicious, Bex Mini Studio, Dancing Johari, Echo 1911, Kitsy, K. Webell, Lindsay, The Oak Magpie, Tara N, Totally Spooky. As I add in the subdermal coloring, dark lips, and delicate veining to her skin, she begins to take on this mesmerizing deep-water mermaid vibe. I was absolutely loving the presence it was giving off. But then when it came to coloring her irises, something just didn't click. Instead of enhancing her mermaid essence, it just felt like it was diminishing her uniqueness. So I decided to take a leap of faith and try something new. I gave her black scaleras. It was a spontaneous decision, one I hadn't considered before, and you know what? It was like a wave of relief came crashing over me. Suddenly, she transformed before my eyes, embodying the very essence of a deep-water mermaid. Those black scaleras made her eyes pop, and I can imagine them standing out in the depths like a bioluminescent creature. I cranked up the drama by dialing the lip color a bit deeper, and I amped up the purple shading around her eyes for that extra pop. It was all about creating that stark contrast between her skin tone and her standout features. But I may have gotten a bit carried away with the eyebrows and ended up going darker than planned. Oops! Lesson learned. Sometimes you just need to know when to put the brush down and step away. After what felt like a gazillion attempts to paint those elusive eyelashes, I finally waved the white flag and decided to switch tactics. Enter watercolor pencils. These babies came to the rescue, allowing me to sketch these lashes after 6 failed gouache attempts. Not that I was counting or anything. And the best part is, with water-based mediums, you'll never know that I had a little eyelash meltdown. It's like magic. Poof, and they were never there. And now onto the grand finale. With a flourish of my brush, I add those final touches of catchlights and highlights, giving her eyes that bit of sparkle and depth. A dash of mica powder adds that magical shimmer. And with that, my friends, her face repaint is officially complete. Now, let me take a moment to marvel at this stunning hair by Jolly Felt's doll on Etsy. These Teeswater curls are a true work of art, and I knew when I saw them that they were meant to be mermaid hair. It was a match made in doll heaven. It's safe to say this is the most gorgeous hair I've ever had the pleasure of working with. Now, let's dive into the next steps of this hair transformation. I prepped these luscious locks just like I would with yarn wefts, but this time I kept them in their individual clumps. Once the glue had dried for 24 hours, I carefully trimmed away any excess and got down to business. With my trusty glue gun in hand, I began delicately attaching these beauties directly to the doll's head, one clump at a time. Since the hair is clumped together, I take extra care to make sure no thin areas are showing. It takes a bit longer this way, but the end result will be worth every single strand. Off camera, I took the time to style her locks into a side swept poof in the front, giving it that enchanting Ariel-esque flair. Securing it at the temple, I added some delicate beading and chains for that extra touch of whimsy, and let me tell you, I'm head over heels for this hair. And let's not forget, this whole journey was part of a fantastic collaboration with other incredibly talented doll artists for MerMay. Be sure to check out their amazing creations too. You'll find the links to their channels down below in the description. I found myself pondering the perfect name to match her deep-sea siren persona. Names that came to mind were associated with darkness or mystery like Nyx or Morgana, but none of them quite fit. And then it came to me, Mariana, feminine yet fierce with ties to the depths of the Mariana Trench. It was a name that resonated with power and beauty, a true reflection of this mermaid's essence. Mariana, along with a few other enchanting creatures, is now available for purchase on my Etsy shop. If you're interested, be sure to check her out. A heartfelt thank you for watching and sticking around until the very end. Your support means the world to me, so see you next time, and remember, always be creating.